Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. In today's video, I'm going to discuss child sex offenders, whether or not they have a particular preference for the type of victim that they target. This video was inspired by Moon Maddox on YouTube, who asked a question related to this, so thank you for inspiring this video. Research for this particular subject has been quite long and has led me to some very surprising facts. I'll begin by looking at the various terms that are used when adults sexually assault or rape those under 16 years of age. Finally, I'll explain the research that's been done to investigate whether paedophiles have a preferred age of child or whether they have a particular preference for a gender. Psychologists need to take great care when they're investigating child sex offenders, and the terms that they use need to accurately describe their desires and behaviours. It's common for general public, law enforcement and the media to use colloquial terms such as pedo, nonce, molester, pervert, perv and so on. It isn't generally known that there are many terms used such as paedophilia, paraphilia, paedophilic desires and many more besides. The most widely used term is paedophile. We tend to label those who rape or sexually abuse children under the age of 16 as being a paedophile. A paedophilic desire is a desire in an adult to have sex with a child. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person will actually engage in sexual activity with a child. A person has paedophilia if and only if he has relatively frequent and intense paedophilic desires. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, commonly referred to as the DSM, is the handbook used by healthcare professionals as a guide to diagnosing mental disorders. According to the DSM, the specific criteria for paedophilia are a recurrent, intense sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges or behaviours involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child or children, and these are generally at the age of 13 or younger, for a period of at least 6 months that must last for. Also, the person must have acted on these sexual urges, or the sexual urges or fantasies become a marked distress, or they come with interpersonal difficulty, and the person who's experiencing those urges is at least 16 years of age and is at least 5 years older than the child or children. It's important to realise that to refer to somebody as a paedophile is to say only that individual has a sexual preference for children. It says little or nothing about any aspects of their character or their personality. To presume somebody isn't a paedophile simply because they're nice or they go to church or they work hard and are kind to animals and so on is completely absurd. Paedophiles span the full spectrum from saints to monsters. In spite of this fact, over and over again, paedophiles are not recognised, investigated, charged, convicted or sent to prison simply because they're nice guys. It's also important to recognise that while paedophiles prefer to have sex with children, they can and do have sex with adults. Adult sexual relationships are more difficult for some paedophiles than for others. Some paedophiles have sex with adults as part of their efforts to gain or continue to have access to a preferred child. For example, one might have occasional sex with a single mother to ensure that they get continued access to her children. There are distinct classifications for other attractions to children depending on the developmental stage the adult is sexually attracted to. Infantophilia is a subtype of paedophilia describing a sexual preference for children less than 5 years old, including toddlers and infants. Those who find children on the cusp of puberty sexually attractive are known as hebephiles. Ephebophiles are individuals who are sexually attracted to children who've reached puberty. This suggests that paedophiles do have a preference for children of a particular age. Not all paedophiles are sex offenders, and conversely, not all child sex offenders are paedophiles. Some people who sexually abuse children aren't preferentially sexually attracted to children at all. The abuse might be a matter of opportunity, and the child becomes some sort of a sexual surrogate for an unavailable adult, or that abuse might represent a need to dominate and control another human being. In the case of Richard Huckle, his sexual abuse of children was related to the power and the prestige given to him by other paedophiles within his community. Richard Huckle had gone from being a quiet middle-class boy from a nice family to a prolific child sex offender. I believe that it's likely he stumbled across the opportunity to abuse children and sell the images and videos on the dark web. He discovered that instead of being a quiet person that nobody really noticed, to being quite revered and held in high regard by a whole community of people. Huckle's behaviour reveals that he wasn't necessarily sexually excited by these children, but was drawn to the attention and the feelings of power and dominance that gave him. I know it's hard to imagine, but some paedophiles don't even realise what they're doing is wrong. They genuinely believe that they're showing these children love. I agree that that is a very difficult concept to comprehend, and it's a shocking statement to those of us who aren't sexually attracted to children. In one research paper that I read, an interview with a self-confessed paedophile realised that and understands that society deems what he did was wrong, but you can't understand why that is the case. Research has shown that human faces can motivate nurturing behaviour or sexual behaviour when adults see a child or an adult face, respectively. This suggests that face processing is tuned to detecting age cues of sexual maturity to stimulate the appropriate reproductive behaviour. And that would be either taking care of them or mating. In paedophilia, sexual attraction is directed to sexually immature children. In individuals attracted to adults, adult faces activate several regions of the brain significantly more than child faces. The same regions were activated in paedophiles, but with a reversed preferential response pattern. What I initially set out to research was whether or not child sex offenders targeted children of a particular age as their preferred type of victim. I also wanted to know whether child sex offenders targeted one gender exclusively. I'd initially thought that that would be a really well-researched area, and that's because these factors would be highly relevant to assess potential risk factors of offenders. However, what I found was that it's not really a well-researched area. I did manage to find some really interesting research articles which had investigated preferences for age and gender amongst child sex offenders. Researchers found that some child sex offenders have preferences for a particular age or gender of children. However, gender choice is somewhat related to the age of the victim. Child sex offenders who demonstrated arousal to prepubescent children were more likely to show arousal to both genders. Attraction to both genders has been found in a number of studies. A study of 678 Canadian sex offenders found that about 25% of them had abused children of both genders. 23% of child molesters who were convicted for molesting girls had also abused boys, and 63% of molesters of boys admitted to sexually abusing female children. The presence of a major mental illness in these offenders increased the odds of gender crossover by more than threefold. Some offenders might be more indiscriminate and opportunistic and assault victims of any age when the circumstances allow them to. Still others might be primarily drawn by a small child's developmental vulnerability and the relative ease of avoiding disclosure by that child. When a very young child is sexually victimised, it can easily go undiscovered. It's estimated that 1.5% of children between the ages of 2 and 5 have been sexually abused. It's likely that some sex offenders are simply more aroused by younger children than by older children, although the reasons for that aren't well known. The proportion of offenders with victims of both genders increased as the victims' ages decreased. Now, that finding suggests that a younger victim age is associated with a higher prevalence of gender crossover. Sex offenders with preschool age victims were most likely to have abused both boys and girls. Preschool children have fewer physical characteristics that distinguish their gender, and this is potentially equalising their attractiveness to some offenders. As well, some sex offenders might be more attracted to the vulnerability, innocence, and the ability to manipulate preschool children than older children. This means that the emotional control over these especially powerless victims might be more motivating than the sexual interest of them. Some molesters might be more indiscriminate and opportunistic and assault victims of any age when the circumstances allow for that. However, it's clear that there are distinct preferences for type of victim. And that's why we have these distinct classifications for child sex offenders. Those with a sexual attraction to very young victims are defined by age. Infantophilia is a subtype of paedophilia describing a sexual preference for children of less than 5 years old, including toddlers and infants. However, older children are defined according to the stages of puberty. In conclusion then, it can be a fairly complex matter, and we can't really say with any kind of accuracy that child sex offenders are exclusively attracted to a specific age or gender of victim. When examining attraction to gender, the age of the victim does have an impact. Those who abuse younger children are less discriminate of gender. This is thought to be because these younger children have less features that would define their gender. As the age of the victims increase, there's more of a preference for one gender in particular. There are specific terms for those attracted to children of these different ages. Some are attracted by very young children. The ability to avoid getting caught might be a contributing factor to that. Some are attracted to prepubescent or pubescent children. However, some offenders abuse various ages of children just simply because the situation makes these victims available. These offenders wouldn't be diagnosed as paedophiles, hebephiles, ebephiles. Other offenders aren't actually sexually attracted to the children that they abuse. Their offending is simply a need to dominate and control another person. I hope that you've not found this video too distressing, but that you have learned something new from it. As a closing note, if you even suspect that a child is being abused, report it. It's better to report it and to be wrong than to not report it and allow a child to be abused. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.